Cheers, everyone. Thank you for joining me. I am Dave Brown, and this is the New Populist. If you are new to my channel, please like and subscribe. Well, as an American, I am truly blessed. The United States is a beautiful country. It is geographically diverse. We have tons of natural resources, tons of farmland. We have everything that you could want. But we have one big problem, and that is our location. To our east, we have the Atlantic Ocean. To our west, we have the Pacific. To our north, we have one country, Canada, which is fairly Americanized, and I know some Canadians would disagree with that. And to our south, we have Mexico, which is for Americans a place to go vacation. And because of our geographical location, a lot of Americans don't travel as much as they should. And because of that, sometimes our perspective of the world is fairly small and obtuse. And I know Europeans, you're jumping in to say, oh yeah, that's true. You're loud, obnoxious, and you don't know what the heck you're talking about. You need to leave America and leave your pickup trucks and pizza. And, to some extent, there's some truth to that. But if you travel to America, within America, we are culturally diverse as well. Maryland's very different than Minnesota. Minnesota is very different than Arizona. And every country has people who are a little more backwards in the rural areas. Again, that's not unique to the United States. That's everywhere. But Europe, yeah, point noted. But as far as not traveling, the one thing that does is your perspective of the world doesn't evolve. And if it doesn't evolve, you're stuck in a very, very short-sighted position. And I sort of recognized this when I was in my early 20s. And because of that, I wanted to travel and do my last year of college outside the United States. Now, my first few years of college was actually at the University of Hawaii, which for me, from Maryland, is a 12-hour flight. It might as well have been across the world. And although Hawaii is part of America, it is very culturally different. So that was my first taste. But then my last year, I went to the University of Madras in Chennai, India, in the state of Tamil Nadu. And studying economics there really radically changed how I viewed economics. And I think really helped me develop a healthier perspective of the world generally. And why was this? Well, one of the things is teaching styles, right? United States, you get a textbook, and for economics, it's very stale. It's supply and demand, trade stuff, comparative advantage versus absolute advantage. It's all numbers, and it doesn't really go past that. And just to make my point, AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she has a bachelor's in economics from a prestigious university, and no offense if you're left-leaning, but she is one of the dumbest individuals I've ever heard talk in my life. So when I go, how does this person have an economics degree and be that stupid? Well, a part of that is our American education system. It doesn't really teach you to think. It just teaches you the concept. It teaches you how to exist within the American economy as a wage slave. So when I traveled to India, the way they approached it was a little different. For example, our testing. Everything was an essay. So you sit down for your test on a certain subject. Here's your paper, write for 2 hours straight. So if you didn't have a lot of knowledge of the subject matter, you're going to be sitting there with your pencil after 2 paragraphs sweating. And a couple of times I was. And that's where you have to reach down to find some of that creative writing. But luckily I had a good, I did study, so it wasn't always just out there, BSing things down. And so that was a big change, was in how they tested you. But another thing happened there as well. I had a professor, and I wish I remembered his name. I think he was actually from Sri Lanka. And one day he was talking about I think it was Adam Smith. And he said to the class, "Do you know who Adam Smith is?" And no one responded. And he stopped. He looked at us quizzically and said, "Hold on a second. You guys are all graduate students. So this is a master's program. For me, it was my last year, my bachelor's. But you're all graduate students studying economics. Many of you will go on to get your PhDs, and you don't know who Adam Smith is? And he was so disappointed. And he made it a point to say, if you're going to study economics and get PhDs and get your master's, you need to go back and study the original works that all these textbooks are based off of. And remember too, a textbook is also an interpretation. This is one schmuck over here saying, this is what I think economics is, and then dictating to the rest of us through a textbook what it is. And this teacher said, read the original source matter. That's how you learn about economics or any subject matter in general. So that is what I did. And when you start reading the source material, you start to look at what you were taught as far as economics in, say, the United States, and you start going, maybe it's a little more complicated than we make it seem. Because in the United States, it's all about capitalism is great. Capitalism should go everywhere. Don't ask any questions. If a country doesn't have capitalism, then they're a bad country. And perhaps the United States needs to go over there and teach them capitalism. So we have an American sort of elitism as far as capitalism. But just living in India itself for a year, you start to understand something very important about economics. And that is, it's much more than just distributing scarce resources. It's about society. It's about culture and people. And all those things together influence economics and your economy. And when you sit down and create an economic system for a country, you have to take into account your history and your culture. And when you don't do this, it causes a huge problem. So let's compare, for example, the United States and India. In the United States, we were founded in the 18th century. It was up until recently, the population in the United States compared to the landmass was relatively small. Then we had all these resources to grow on and to expand onto. Versus India, which has over 1 billion people, that after the partition with Pakistan was sort of a bit of turmoil. And their resource situation is very different as well. They don't have as much oil as the United States does, which is a necessity for growth. And there's a deep culture in India that goes back thousands of years. So what works for the United States economically, you just can't pick up, bring over to India, and drop there. Especially when you have hundreds of millions of people living below the poverty line. How fair is that to say, all right, guys, we have capitalism now. No more help from the government. Everybody just takes care of themselves. Well, you have hundreds of millions of people below the poverty line. Is that a fair system to have? And I would argue no. So what works for India may not work for the United States. And if you travel and you see with your own eyes, you understand this. But it's hard to explain that to somebody who hasn't traveled that much. And so everybody needs to travel because, again, it will change your perspective. And we just don't see these flawed comparisons with India. It happens with other countries as well. For example, oftentimes we compare ourselves to Sweden or Norway. We say, oh, this works well in Sweden. Why don't we have it here in the United States? Well, Sweden has 9 million people. It's a tiny country. The United States has 330 million. Their culture is different. Their background is different. How the people there, how cohesive they are is different than the United States, where we're very, we have a huge mix of people here. That affects how economies work. And if you don't recognize that and you try to force something on people without taking those things into consideration, again, you create catastrophes. But then again, if you come to think about it, does the United States actually export freedom and democracy to anybody and capitalism? That was our pretext for the invasion in Iraq and Afghanistan. We're bringing freedom and democracy. But of course, we were actually doing something very different. We were trying to get natural resources and enforce the US dollar. So even when the United States, when we say we're going to bring these things to another country, Again, that's just a pretext for something a little more devious. And in countries that are economically successful, that don't have an American system, that is due to them. For example, Europe and France and Germany. Are they economically successful because of freedom and democracy, or because it's a product of just their society over hundreds of years? Of course, we have France, we have the revolution there, which is, at the same time with the American Revolution. But their whole process, how they got there in the first place, again, is very different than the United States, where we've never had monarchy. We just came here and we said, King George, we had enough. We're going to do our own thing. And we did, and we had success doing it. But France's situation, Germany's situation, very different. And they made it work for themselves. They had their own system, and they were prosperous because of it. So America doesn't need to go around handing out prosperity and economic freedom and capitalism and democracy. Let other countries, based on their own circumstances, based on their own people and their own society, let them decide what might work best for that country. And the last thing is capitalism itself. Now, as an American, I generally believe in free markets and giving people as much economic freedom as possible. But does America have true capitalism? Has America ever had true capitalism? The answer is no. We've always had a mixed system. And in fact, early on in our country, it was a fairly unfair system. If you're a person who looked like me, you were working in the field somewhere, working for somebody so they could have economic prosperity off of your labor. Now, this is not a combination of the entire country. We've improved. But we've never had this golden ideal of pure capitalism and freedom. It has never existed. That is a creation of our own mind. So when we export things to other countries like freedom and democracy and capitalism, again, what are we truly exporting? And so my position is, how about we let other countries decide what kind of country they want to have economically, instead of dictating what it should be. Let other countries decide, and let their societies find what works for them. And when they find what works for them, they will have prosperity. And with prosperity comes peace, and peace is good for everyone. Well, that's it for now. Again, if you are new to this channel, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.